Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third webinar. Today, we're going to talk about sex work during COVID-19. As you're probably aware, the lockdown is about to be eased down so that some people, hopefully at some point, all of us will be able to get back to work. And for many of us, I know it feels like this is long overdue, and I know that many people have been working during the lockdown. And I think it's important to keep it in mind right now then that even if the lockdown is over, the virus is still out there and you can still get infected and you can still pass on the infection and people can still die. I think this is something that needs to be kept in mind. The lockdown wasn't there for the virus. The lockdown was there to flatten the curve, to make sure that the influx of patients into the NHS rooms doesn't overwhelm the system and that the NHS can cope with it. This is now almost over, but people are still at risk and you can still be at risk. So I think for a while, we need to keep it in mind that the sex work isn't going to be what it used to be, and we don't know how long that's going to last. So here are some tips that we have collected from various sources online. We're not reinventing the wheel. There have been numerous sex work organizations that have put out very helpful, very detailed instructions on how to keep yourself safe from the virus and how to keep your family safe during the lockdown. And we have taken bits and pieces from a lot of such, from many different documents from various organizations. One of them that we found particularly useful was a document by migrant sex worker organization in Canada called Butterfly. And let's get right into it. So, first of all, when a client contacts you, see if you can actually avoid meeting them in person. Obviously, we need the work and they want to see you. But at the moment, maybe we can still trade it off for something else. Maybe we can just engage in phone sex with them. Maybe we could offer camming instead. And by camming, I don't mean working through a camming platform where there is a third party. No, I mean you opening your Skype and calling your client, and your client paying you in whether that's going to be a direct bank transfer or an Amazon voucher or a Cash App payment or any other payments that you're happy to take. Please consider those. There is also a company that offers for sale vouchers for Tesco and Sainsbury's. This is not something that you can buy on Tesco and Sainsbury's website, but we're going to put a link in the video description that you can maybe send to your clients and they can forward you Sainsbury's or a Tesco voucher as a form of payment, or just because they like you a lot. So if you've tried those and it's still better for both you and the client to meet in person, let's talk about the risk assessments that you need to do and certain things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, maybe have a chat with your client about how socially isolated they have been recently. Maybe they have been in the lockdown on their own. Maybe they have been in the lockdown with their family. Maybe they are a key worker and they have been working all the way through the lockdown. Obviously, certain things like the amount of flatmates or family members that your clients have will increase your exposure to the virus. And this is something that you may want to keep in mind. Also see if your client or maybe somebody that you live with or maybe you yourself are at risk. Are you immunocompromised? How old are you? But please don't feel invincible if you're young. The virus affects older people more, but it doesn't mean that you're safe from it. And finally, consider certain things like, for example, an infrared thermometer. Again, in the video description, we will put a little link to it, to the cheapest one that we managed to find. And maybe on arrival, measure the client's temperature. And if it's below 37.8, which is the guideline that NHS use at the moment, feel free to proceed with the booking. But always make sure that you keep your best interest in mind. And if the client's temperature is 37.6, you may want to bail out of it. Make sure that you care for yourself first and foremost. Washing hands. You can't wash your hands enough. In fact, if on arrival you can make your clients wash hands, perfect. If you can make your clients have a shower, perfect. If everybody can have a shower, both you and your client, before the booking, during the booking, and after the booking, do that. And not just hand washing, but generally hygiene. As we're all aware, the virus is airborne. Where possible, wear a face mask. And again, where possible, see if you can make your clients wear a face mask. And in fact, in the best spirits of the lockdown, if you can wear a face mask and your clients can wear a face mask and you can stay in different corners of the room and just use your imagination, why not? Spice things up. But other than that, always make sure that you keep tissues on hand for literally anything. And above all else, avoid any exchange of saliva. Try to avoid kissing in the mouth, as well as kissing your client on the face, as well as touching his hand, your client's hands, or putting your own hands after touching your client's body into your mouth. So anything to do with mouth, try to keep your mouth closed. That will reduce your risk. And obviously, no direct contact with bodily fluids. That's not necessarily about the virus. That's just, if you can save yourself a trip to the local clinic for gonorrhea treatment, good for you. Now, practices. Anybody wants to chip in on practices?
Hello, I'll take that over. So, obviously, when it comes to sex work, it's going to be really difficult to keep. It's going to keep from being so physically close with your partner. But there are some ways of doing it, which we covered a moment ago. So some of the precautions that you might want to think about are the precautions that other health workers have already been looking at. So look at healthcare workers and seeing what current and updated precautions are being discovered for those workers, and see whether some of those are available or options that you could look into. Some of the unconfirmed transmission routes currently are, there's generally no agreed evidence currently that COVID-19 can be transmitted through genital secretions. But again, be aware of STIs and other issues that can happen when you're not using protective measures with that. When it comes to kissing, we mentioned before, be really aware, even if they're asymptomatic, they could be carrying COVID, and so therefore there's transmissions there. There's high risks, even to the level where the French government and some other European governments are talking about banning people kissing even on the cheek as a greeting. There are some known transmission routes. Again, we've covered a little bit of them so far, but you want to be aware of things like COVID droplets in the air after someone has sneezed, when they're coughing, and potentially touching surfaces where these droplets have landed. So you're able to then bring it into yourself, or your partner the client is picking it up from there. So you want to be aware of these droplets on the breath. With regards to that, some general practices people say is it's sort of safer being outside because things are airborne, and so there's fresh air, there's more movement, there's maybe a bit more space, tolerances that are allowed there. But be aware, if you're thinking about sex work outside, there's a whole bunch of other risks that you need to be aware of if you're not used to working outside. And the NUM website has some really good guidance for taking on board some of the safety measures that you can take. So that might be looking at checking out whether someone's license plate has been an offender before, or sending details to a friend. There's a lot more information and security guidance once you're a member with NUM. And also you can talk to the casework team to find out certain specifics. So the fact that it's outside still carries its own risk. So do be aware, even at close distances, it's still quite high risk. When it comes to working inside, you want to be aware that you're bleaching surfaces and using disinfectants on surfaces that the client, you're aware of them touching, and generally around the house, because you're not always aware what surfaces have been touched or remembering what's happened there. So regular hygiene around the house or area that you're working in. It might be a car. When you're able to clean these surfaces, you're much more aware of reducing your risks when you're in an environment. With airborne transmissions, have a look at both partners wearing masks to reduce some of the risks there. There's a number of ways that you can reduce these risks while wearing masks. And some of that involves things like role play. So have a look into, does your client, are they interested in a police role play where maybe a mask is worn, or a role play where someone's being gagged or kidnapped, or hospital role play? A number of these different role plays feature masks, and it's quite it's not so tricky to sort of weave in to see what their interests are with that. Another element is keeping meetings brief. So there's some recommendations by medical groups about keeping close contact meets under around 15 minutes. So you might be able to offer quickies, hand jobs, other sort of short meetings, which maybe reduce the average transmission risk. And finally, as far as like the airborne elements are concerned, have a look at using different positions that maybe you're not breathing in straight what the client is breathing out. So have a look at a position where maybe something like the reverse cowgirl, which is one person lying flat and the other person astride them facing the other direction. So your mouths are actually in different directions. You're still close quarters, there's still high risks, but you're aware of the fact that it's airborne and you're doing what you can. Have a look at things like glory holes, where you're not, again, at sort of mouth-to-mouth level. So you want to be aware of some of these elements. When it comes to other transmission risks, we're still like looking into the blood-borne transmission elements. So be aware of what we do with things like HIV and other STI prevention. So you're looking into using condoms, looking at other preventative measures, which have been working with other blood transmittable viruses. So when it comes to getting partners to use things like condoms, or maybe you're considering other barriers for other parts, then you can use phrases like, if it's not on, it's not on. So referring to, I've got a policy, that's how my sex work is offered, and if you want to meet that, then that's available. Then remember the importance of peer-to-peer education. So keep up to date with the communities around you. Sex workers, we're constantly learning things. You're able to put feedback in about things that you've learned, and together as a community, we're able to support each other. And that's actually something which, again, with communities like the HIV community, the importance of peer-to-peer education has been vital. When it comes to testing, if you're aware that you're picking up symptoms, seeing if you're able to introduce ways where you have enough safety to be able to stop working at that point, so that you're not bringing new risks into the pool, if that's possible. Because again, one of your clients might see another sex worker later on. If that's possible, what safety mechanisms have you got there to be able to take a break? If that's, I know obviously that's still quite that doesn't work for everyone. One of the elements that you can look into is maybe exploring what fetishes your clients have. So look at BDSM. So are they into sort of the bondage? Are they into control play? What sort of things are they into? Because some of those activities can be lower risk. So, for example, foot play, cake sitting, voyeurism, strip shows, mutual masturbation. There's a whole bunch of other activities where if you focus on how do you keep your body clean, and maybe you're not face to face, and maybe there's a distance if someone were to sneeze or something like that, you have an increased like chance to being able to put yourself into a safe space. So there's these elements that you can look into. A lot of the information which I've been saying today came from Swap USA, and that it's fantastic. Again, these groups, like again, peer-to-peer sort of sharing is so vital with all of this. With one moment which we said, with one element which we covered a little bit earlier, when it comes to using payments towards apps, be aware of what apps are like freezing accounts for sex workers, and at what points you need to potentially withdraw cash from these apps so that they get into your bank account quickly, just in case you have a client that may try and withdraw the funds from there, like reclaim the cash after making a transaction. So be aware of these sort of elements in apps. And that's my question.
And as I was listening, it crossed my mind that this is a lot to keep in mind, and this may feel overwhelming, especially if you haven't worked in a while and you're trying to ease yourself back to work. I think it's maybe a good solution to keep this in mind as just a few extra things that you need to negotiate with your clients. Every time a client gets in touch with us, we go through the process of negotiating our services and prices with them. So these are just a few extra things that we need to negotiate about. And if you think about it this way, and if you make it clear to the client that their health is on the cards as much as yours, I'm sure they will be more forthcoming about the details. Now, let's have a look at the next slide.
Right. We also wanted to have a really quick look at the political aspect of COVID-19 and how the state has repressed sex workers and other marginalized groups more than usually. One part of this is that sex workers are being fined for working. We have heard of a bunch of situations where sex workers are being fined for breaking the lockdown by working. And as we all know, if you fine a sex worker for working, they will have to work more to pay the fine. If you have been fined for sex working either before COVID-19 or during, you can contact ScotPEP in Scotland. They will help you pay your fine, and also the English Collective of Prostitutes, ECP, and the rest of the UK, who will give you some tips, like legal tips, and will help you fight the fine potentially if that's a possibility. What we also see in the UK and all over the world is that brothel raids are continuing, welfare checks are continuing, and generally the police has received a lot more powers because of COVID-19, and these powers are being abused in some situations. What we also see is, especially in the UK, is that the welfare state in times of crisis is failing. Some people are falling through the cracks of support schemes, and if a state support scheme starts with the words "you are eligible if," then by definition it isn't for everyone. And state support during crises should clearly be there for everyone. What we as NOM, in accordance with many other sex worker-led organizations, are therefore demanding is financial support for sex workers that is easily accessible and also accessible immediately, because that is simply not the case. What we also see more than usually during COVID-19 is that sex workers need workers' rights. Sex work is not recognized as work in most countries, and that makes organizing difficult, and that means that support schemes aren't for us sometimes. We do fall through all of these cracks. In a decriminalized system, such as New Zealand, we see that sex workers are being supported by the state at the moment. Obviously not completely, there's also issues there, but generally in a decriminalized system, sex workers have possibilities to receive state support during crisis. Sex workers are also often a part of other marginalized communities who are often overlooked by governments and who are disproportionately more affected by the coronavirus. One example for that is that homeless people, for example, are being put into hotels or hostels at the moment, which is great that we have housing there's housing offered to homeless people on the one hand, but also they are in close, confined proximity of each other and are therefore a lot more affected by coronavirus and at a lot higher risk. We as NOM, or as the ROUT team at NOM, we will therefore recommend you to join the union. Join the United Voices of the World union. We will put a link in the description box of where you can sign up. Let's get organized. Let's hold the state accountable. Let's just fight all of this together. The union is a great way to start getting organized in that regard and make sex work more recognized as work together. You can also look into joining other sex worker-led organizations and groups such as Swarm or the English Collective of Prostitutes, or in Scotland that will be Scot Pep or Umbrella Lane.
Can you tell us a little more about the benefits of joining the union?
Of course. Generally, I think being part of a union that is officially recognized as a union, therefore can help you with legal issues, can help you in court if you do have issues with either the state or with your employer. That often in the UK is for strippers who have issues with their bosses in strip clubs or with other situations. So just having that legal backing of a union, of an official union that other organizations that might be a charity or otherwise organized don't have. That is just something that the UEW is offering, and it's also a great community.
Thank you. And finally, now that we're getting back to work, we want you to remember that NAM has been out there supporting sex workers during the lockdown, and NAM caseworkers are still on to take your report of violence at, any day. Specifically two sex workers, Hannah and Carolyn, and you can see their mobile numbers and their email addresses.
Caseworkers.
If you want to get... caseworkers. If you want to get in touch with them, they are happy to take your reports. They're also happy to help you with literally anything that you may need at the moment, whether that's your application for universal credit or whether that's being pointed in the direction of a hardship fund that can meet some of your needs at the moment. They could try to do that, as well as matters of other questions. And also, as we mentioned in our last webinar, NAM is now giving out food vouchers to sex workers who are in need of access to food and can't get that through a local food bank. So maybe give Hannah or Carolyn a call and they can arrange that for you. And if you have any questions or if you want more information about anything, please get in touch with us, as well as Hannah and Carolyn. And please remember that if during your work you came across any tips that you think we should have mentioned, let us know. We can always mention them, but also share the tips that you have discovered for yourself with other sex workers and with other sex worker-led organizations, so that more sex workers can benefit from them. And let's stay safe. Bye.